Hey there movie lovers, welcome back to Rocky Watches Movies. Today we're taking a look at John Carpenter's 1988 sci-fi classic, They Live. Starring wrestling legend Roddy Piper, this cult favourite combines alien conspiracies, subliminal messages, and a sharp attack on consumerism and 1980s capitalism. But there's far more to this film than meets the eye, so put on those sunglasses, open your eyes to the truth, and join us for 20 things you never knew about They Live. The film was adapted from Ray Nelson's science fiction short story 8 o'clock in the morning, originally published in the 1960s. However, John Carpenter's more direct inspiration was an Eclipse Comics adaptation of that story, which he discovered in the mid-80s. Intrigued by its premise of aliens secretly enslaving humanity, Carpenter sought out the original. Nelson's story centred on a man who is hypnotised by a stage performer and awakens to discover that the entire human race has been placed under the aliens' control. He has until 8 o'clock in the morning to uncover the truth and stop them. Carpenter liked the idea of humanity being controlled by an alien menace, but was less interested in the hypnotism element. After acquiring the rights to the story, he began adapting it, replacing hypnotism with the concept of Americans being controlled through subliminal messages. John Carpenter has described They Live as a primal scream against Reaganomics, using its science fiction premise to deliver social commentary about what he believed was happening to the American middle class during the 80s. While developing the film, Carpenter found himself watching more television and became increasingly aware of how much advertising was focused on persuading people to buy things. This helped shape the film's approach to consumerism and social control. The role of Nada was originally written for Kurt Russell. However, John Carpenter decided to cast someone else after having already worked with Russell on 4 films: Elvis, Escape from New York, The Thing, and Big Trouble in Little China. Carpenter was also impressed by Keith David's performance in The Thing, and with David in mind, Carpenter wrote the role of Frank specifically for him. After Carpenter had decided against Russell, he was looking for an everyman who looked as though he had lived a hard life. Carpenter, a lifelong wrestling fan, became interested in Roddy Piper for the role of John Nada, and saw him as the ideal man to represent the blue-collar working class. The pair were introduced by Piper's manager following WrestleMania 3. Piper was keen to pursue more acting roles, and their first meeting was surprisingly straightforward. According to Piper, their conversation quickly went from discussing food and champagne to Carpenter asking him whether he wanted to star in his next film. Funnily enough, Roddy Piper had never even heard of John Carpenter before being approached about starring in They Live. The film was made on a relatively small budget of about $4 million. This meant the filmmakers often had to find creative ways to depict a world secretly controlled by aliens. For scenes where Nada sees subliminal messages on billboards through his sunglasses, the production used traditional matte paintings rather than paying to install and film new billboards. The supermarket scene proved far more complicated. Every visible product label had to be replaced with a plain white label containing a subliminal message. The crew initially tried filming inside a real supermarket, but there were simply too many labels to cover. Instead, they had to construct an entire supermarket set. Carpenter later described the subliminal supermarket as the film's biggest expenditure. The film also reused props from other films. Several strange-looking devices used by the aliens, particularly in scenes set inside their compound, may look familiar to fans of Ghostbusters. That is because they were the same props originally used as ghost detection equipment. The sunglasses used in They Live are known as Hoffman lenses, named after Swiss chemist Albert Hoffman, who synthesized LSD and was the first person to experience its psychedelic effects. The distinctive sunglasses have since become a popular piece of They Live memorabilia, with companies such as Fright Rags and Middle of Beyond releasing officially licensed limited edition replicas. There are some conflicting reports out there on the epic fight from the film. The confrontation lasts around 6 minutes and revolves around Frank's refusal to put on the sunglasses. One version is that the fight was always intended to be lengthy. Carpenter's screenplay reportedly devoted several almost empty pages to the sequence, repeatedly stating simply, "The fight continues." The other most popular version is that the fight between Nada and Frank was originally intended to last less than a minute, with the screenplay simply featuring a blank page with the words "They fight." Through extensive rehearsals and choreography, the fight grew into the brutal 6-minute brawl. Carpenter brought in Jeff Imada, a fight choreographer and stunt coordinator, to develop the sequence around Roddy Piper's wrestling ability and Keith David's physicality. Imada rehearsed and choreographed the scene with Piper and David for more than a month. When Carpenter was later asked whether he had ever considered shortening the fight during editing, his answer was an emphatic no. The aliens are supposed to be everywhere disguised as ordinary people, from supermarket shoppers and police officers to the President of the United States. In reality, however, many of them were played by the same person, Jeff Imada, who also served as the film's stunt coordinator. Carpenter originally hired several actors to play the ghouls, but was unhappy with at least one of the male performers. He then asked Imada to take over the roles. Imada ended up playing not all of them, but quite a few. They Live's most famous line came from Roddy Piper himself.
"I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum."
He drew inspiration from interviews he had given over the years as his wrestling persona, Rowdy Roddy Piper, and passed his ideas on to John Carpenter. The version Carpenter chose was inspired by something Piper had said when facing Playboy Buddy Rose. "I'm here to chew bubblegum and kick ass." The film added the now famous conclusion, "And I'm all out of bubblegum." Carpenter wrote They Live under the pseudonym Frank Armitage. He explained that the decision was partly a reaction to the sheer amount of credit he had received on earlier projects, particularly Christine, which was promoted as John Carpenter's Christine, directed by John Carpenter, with music by John Carpenter. Carpenter chose the name Frank Armitage because the character appeared in H.P. Lovecraft's The Dunwich Horror. He selected it simply because he was a fan of Lovecraft's work. As with many of his films, John Carpenter also composed the music for They Live, working with composer and sound designer Alan Howarth. Their approach was largely improvisational, with Carpenter arriving at Howarth's studio without a finished musical plan. While Howarth handled the programming, Carpenter sat at a keyboard with the film playing in front of him and began creating the score as he watched. The initial tempo was based directly on the pace of Nada walking across the railway tracks in the opening scene. From there, Carpenter developed the music around a simple bass part, while Howarth made adjustments during the process. Carpenter was also responsible for the alien voice saying "sleep." His voice was recorded and then manipulated by Howarth to create the eerie effect. They used a genuine homeless camp rather than a constructed set for the scenes where Nada lives. The production also hired real homeless people as extras, giving the setting an authenticity that would have been difficult to recreate. Rather than simply using them as unpaid background performers, the production provided them with both food and wages. Although the character Nada is never given a first name and is listed simply as Nada in the end credits, Carpenter encouraged Roddy Piper to create a personal backstory for him. Piper developed an entire history for Nada, but never shared it with Carpenter or anyone else. Following Piper's death in 2015, that backstory remained known only to him. Roddy Piper also brought more to Nada than his physical appearance. Like the character, Piper had experienced homelessness and, despite his larger-than-life rowdy Roddy Piper wrestling persona, could also be a loner and an introvert. These similarities helped give his first major acting performance an added sense of authenticity. After Nada hits the bank and enters a side street, he confronts a human police officer, disarms him and orders him to leave. Nada tells him to beat your feet. But according to Roddy Piper, the actor playing the officer misunderstood the instruction during the first take and began running on the spot. Neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups have appropriated They Live, reinterpreting its story about hidden alien overlords as a literal metaphor for anti-Semitic conspiracy theories involving Jewish control of the media and global financial systems. John Carpenter has rejected that interpretation, clarifying that the film is about yuppies and unrestrained capitalism, and has nothing to do with the Jewish control of the world. Several musicians have paid tribute to They Live in their music videos. Green Day referenced the film in the video for Back in the USA from Greatest Hits, God's Favourite Band. Punk band Anti-Flag also drew inspiration from the film for the video accompanying their song The Disease. David Banner and the Ninth Wonder similarly used They Live as an influence for their 2010 video for Slow Down. They Live has been referenced in several video games as well. The 1991 game The Simpsons Bart vs. the Space Mutants features a nod to the film, with Bart using special sunglasses to reveal aliens who have invaded Springfield. More than 2 decades later, Saints Row 4 featured a much more direct parody. Released in 2013, the game included Roddy Piper and Keith David voicing fictionalized versions of themselves in a recreation of the famous fight between Nada and Frank. John Carpenter revealed in 1996 that he had always wanted to make a sequel to They Live, which remained one of his favourite films, but he was never able to secure sufficient interest or financial backing. In 2010, a remake was stated as being in development, with Carpenter attached as producer and Matt Reeves eventually signing on to write and direct. The project shifted into a new adaptation of Ray Nelson's original story, moving away from the film's political satire. Then in 2023, producer Sandy King hinted that discussions about expanding They Live into other formats were still taking place. But unfortunately, no continuation or remake has come to fruition yet. And there you have it, folks. You now know a little bit more about They Live. If you enjoyed the video, which I presume you did as you got this far, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any future videos coming to Rocky Watches Movies. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.